welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. I returned to Out of Africa at page 196, Karen Blixen, because it's become very cold, and she's describing the highlands at this very period that we're in at the moment in Nairobi. And if you're in Nairobi, you'll understand what she's saying extremely well. The early morning air of the African highlands is of such a tangible coldness and freshness, and that certainly was the case up in Lower, that time after time the same fancy there comes back to you. You are not on earth, but in deep dark waters, going ahead along the bottom of the sea. It is not even certain that you are moving at all. The flows of chilliness against your face may be the deep-sea currents, and your car, like some sluggish electric fish, may be sitting steadily upon the bottom of the sea, staring in front of her with the glaring eyes of her lamps, and letting the submarine life pass by here. The stars are so large because they are not real stars, but reflections shimmering upon the surface of the water. And I woke up Hannah very early at Lower because it was just bedecked with stars. Alongside your path on the sea bottom, live things darker than their surroundings keep on appearing, jumping up and sweeping into the long grass as crabs and beach fleas will make their way into the sand. The lights get clearer, and about sunrise the sea bottom lifts itself towards the surface, a new created island. Worlds of smells, she gets this right, drift quickly past you, fresh, rank smells of the olive bushes, the brine scent of burnt grass, a sudden quelling smell of decay. And that really is perfectly timed for the period we're in now. And then I came across a poem by Rumi, The Dream That Must Be Interpreted, and I've taken the liberty of missing out a bit, but I'll just give you the salient points. This place is a dream, only a sleeper considers it real. Then death comes like dawn, and you wake up laughing at what you thought was your grief. A man goes to sleep in the town where he has always lived, and he dreams he's living in another town. In the dream, he doesn't remember the town he's sleeping in his bed in. He believes the reality of the dream town. The world is that kind of sleep. The dust of many crumbled cities settles over us like a forgetful doze, but we are older than those cities. We began as a mineral, we emerged into plant life and into animal state, and then into being human. And always we have forgotten our former states, except in early spring when we slightly recall being green again. That's how a young person turns toward a teacher. That's how a baby leans toward the breast without knowing the secret of its desire, yet turning instinctively. Humankind is being led along an evolving course through this migration of intelligences. And though we seem to be sleeping, there is an inner wakefulness that directs the dream, and that will eventually startle us back to the truth of who we are. He's fabulous, and it was real privilege once going to Turkey and going to Konya and visiting the mausoleum of Rumi. And on it is said that message I've said countless times before about come, come, whoever you are. And as you enter it, you're so intoxicated. And it was fantastic. And we watched a sema. I joke not, but I came out of that place, it was a full moon, and I was so inebriated. Elephants in Lower. I'm going to put up an image of the elephants that we saw in Lower, and then read you my piece from over the weekend. Tourism's contribution in Kenya cannot be ignored. The president not too long ago said tourism has been greatly affected by these terror activities. The industry, which contributes 10% to GDP, is virtually on its knees. Tourism is our third biggest source of foreign exchange after inward remittances and agriculture, and earned $1.02 billion last year, or about 12% of GDP. Mike Macharia, the CEO of the Kenya Association of Hotels and Caterers, has estimated that tourism gives direct employment to 500,000 Kenyans and supports 10 times that number if family members and indirect employment are taken into account. A tsunami of travel advisories after a string of attacks culminating in the Peketoni incident have simply cratered coastal tourism. It is clear that the government is unhappy with the advisories, and this is seen in a report carried in the Telegraph last week, where it was alleged that sources said Nairobi was delaying clearance for troops from 2nd Battalion, the parachute regiment, to fly into the country in what diplomats believe is a rebuke for Britain tightening travel advice to the East African nation. Regarding our reaction to travel advisories, I think we need to stop reacting as if it's all a conspiracy. It's patently not. These countries all have a duty of care towards their citizens, and you can just imagine how countries are going to react, in particular with their ambassadors, if their citizens get caught up in the crossfire in the current circumstances. Heads will roll so fast, it's not even funny. I said we exist in a 24-hour, always-on world, and silly comments that 1 million Chinese tourists are set to come to our rescue are just that, silly. Inward Chinese tourists are less than 40,000 annually, and just like the buyers of our Eurobond, where China did not feature, versus a 66% uplift from North America, we need to deal with the situation as we find it. The longer we fail to deal with the situation as it is, the deeper the crater will turn out to be. Interestingly, when Peketoni occurred, there was a lot of debate on social media about the fact that Peketoni was not Lamu and how tourists should recognize that lack of proximity. These comments make us feel better momentarily, but to anyone making a decision about where they will take their holiday, proximity is irrelevant. The point is, Peketoni is in Kenya. I said we need to get real and real quick. The World Bank senior economist for Kenya got real last week when they downshifted their GDP projections for Kenya to 4.7% from 5.3% previously, and cited the spate of terrorist attacks in Kenya as affecting both tourism revenues and investment. The situation is perilous, and it's unlikely to recover this year or next. Last week I attended the book launch of Wings of Kenya, a photographic book about birds by Lorenzo Barelli, His Excellency Jacques Peterloo and Samuel Mugo. The book launch was advertised as a new travel advisory, come to Kenya for birding. And then over the weekend I attended the 15th annual Safaricom Marathon, which is organised by Tusk Trust, supported by Safaricom, held in Lower Downs, hosts more than 1,000 runners, and has raised over $4.2 million. And I was saying that both Birds and the Lower Marathon are hugely successful niche tourism events which resonate globally. In these trying times, we need to leverage these types of attractions because it is these which are able to hurdle the interference and noise. The commoditized part of our tourism industry will naturally race to the bottom. It always does in these types of circumstances. The niche component of our tourism is where the juice is and has enormous summoning power. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of the giraffe that we saw in Lebanon on the way back from the marathon to the camp. And then what I discovered from Jacques, of course, was a long-crested eagle, which was a photograph I took in the quite late evening. Somehow I managed to light it up. When I sent it to Jacques, he told me straight away what it was. I like this photograph of little sunflowers in full bloom on a field in Dangjin, South Korea. I was playing Elton John, Benny and the Jets, to myself this morning. Rather good it is too. And then moving along to political reflections, the United States has increased its military presence in Iraq, ordering 300 more troops to Iraq, the Pentagon announced Monday. New troops, 200 of whom arrived Sunday and Monday, will provide security for the US Embassy, the Baghdad airport, and other facilities in Iraq. Deployment includes a detachment of helicopters and unmanned aerial vehicles, which will bolster airfield and travel route security. 300 troops are in addition to 300 US advisors who will help train Iraq's security forces, bringing the total amount of American forces in Iraq to about 800. Bloomberg is saying there's no good Iraq options for Obama as Russia and Iran jump in. Iran in particular has a huge interest in this scenario. As Russia and Iran step in to bolster the government in Baghdad, President Obama has no good options to help defeat the al-Qaeda splinter group that's proclaimed an Islamic caliphate in Iraq and Syria. White House has offered limited military assistance to Nouri al-Maliki. I don't think they're very invested in his future at all. Basically, al-Maliki is pushing for a coalition. They're pushing for a coalition government to unite Iraqis, and saying that it's in the US's interest to prevent one of the largest Arab states, the second biggest crude oil producer in OPEC, that's bordered by Syria and Iran, from falling into the hands of the Sunni militants. Bloomberg is estimating that they control 10,000 fighters and $2 billion in assets. Iran has deployed hundreds of troops from its elite Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to reinforce its Shiite ally. That was expected. The Pentagon delivered 100 new laser-guided Hellfire missiles to Iraq, part of a batch of 500, saying that it's instructive, this is interesting, to recall that 165,000 well-trained US forces, supported by snipers, heavy bombers, and everything in between, and by coalition forces and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi troops and police, had to fight hard to defeat ISIL's predecessor al-Qaeda in Iraq during the 2007 surge of more than 20,000 additional US forces in Iraq. That's an important point, and I think they're going to be difficult to dislodge. And therefore, it's like the new normal, but I can't see them going for any further than here, because then you're going into the sheer heartland. The government and Iraqi forces are in no position to retake territory, said the Rand Corps' Robinson. The most the government can really do right now is hold the line. I think that's the point. A fellow called Thomas Erdbrink tweeted that the Iranian leader Khamenei says ISIS is work of Western intelligence agencies. The enemies of Islam are confronting Islam in the name of Islam. He certainly, if I was him, I'd be quite nervous, because I think President Obama's putting in a bit of capacity just over the border. They're parked on the other side as well. And, Seymour Hersh wrote a long time ago about the redirection, and I think President Obama can redirect momentarily here. Nassim Taleb said, "Don't compare caliphates. The first caliphate was tolerant, used Syro-Byzantine, Jewish and Assyrian administration. Today they killed the other," he said. He's right. Then takes me back to a comment made by Mr. Adnani. He said, "Listen to your caliph and obey him. Support your state, which grows every day." The Islamic State of its new caliph, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, has many enemies but will not go down easily, says Patrick Coburn. I'll put up a photograph of al-Baghdadi. And then the Asia Times is saying, in addition, ISIS, which of course is now ICE, or is, also controls the PR wars, and it's quite an extraordinary PR campaign they've managed to conduct. It's practically experimental and ahead of the curve in a way which is interesting of itself. And then some saying we have trademarked empire of chaos, revenge against Baghdad, Tehran, and why not Moscow. Iraq duly merges with Ukraine, and as for payback redux, it's almost all spelled out, because from northern Africa and across the Middle East to the Caucasus and all the way to western China, the name of the burning game is to keep Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski's Eurasian Balkans ever simmering in a funeral pyre. The grim tapestry of conflict signals a revival of great power rivalry and interstate conflict that existing multilateral bodies like the UN are profoundly ill-equipped to manage. So, well, it's not exactly dystopian. It doesn't look that fantastic, does it? Musil and Meta-Musil, The Inevitable World War I by Spengler, is another interesting article. That book to which he's referring, which is Robert Musil's The Man Without Qualities, is an outstanding book. It really is. It really is outstanding, and it's about this society which is seemingly immune to global events that are happening, and suddenly, Europe falls into war. And you know that's coming, but you're seeing the society pre the war breaking out. North Korea's official news agency released a picture showing its leader Kim Jong-un observing a tactical rocket launch by the Korean People's Army. It's quite an extraordinary photograph. And I wrote about North Korea on November 2010 when I said, far away in distant lands lies the Hermit Kingdom. This land is ruled by the House of Kim, and its capital is Pyongyang. The first and eternal president was Kim Il-sung, and his successor, Kim Jong-il, whose designated successor is Kim Jong-un. And I said they all have had tiny little hands like the elves and the shoemaker. Came across this tweet: Argentina widens its lead over Ukraine. Venezuela is the most likely country to default next year. CDSs are saying this has a 44% probability. Currency markets, it's been more of the same over the night, with further US dollar weakness, with gains in the pound, the euro, the yen, the Aussie, triggered more by momentum and market stops than any economic or fundamental news. The euro is at 136.88, just shy of a 6-week high at 137. Dollar index 79.82, fell as far as 79.759. A low not seen since May 9. The Japanese yen 101.44, not far off a 6-week high of 101.23. Swiss franc 0.8873. The pound above 171 now at 171.06. Touched 171.13, highest since October 2008. It's up 2.7% this quarter. Aussie 0.9417. And it's been trading around 94 for the past 3 weeks. Indian rupee 60.175. But interestingly, the country got 92.4 millimeters of rain last month, or 43% less than the average between 1951 and 2000. Worries about El Nino. South Korean won 10.12, Brazilian real 221.44, Egyptian pound 715.03, and the South African rand at 1062.49. I put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, 79.82, and it's fallen quite. It's been a poor month for the dollar, which has seen it fall on this index from 81.02, which was a 4-month high, now to 79.82. Euro dollar, this is very strong, 136.88, notwithstanding that inflation was pitched at 0.5% in June, far below the ECB's medium-term target of just below 2%. Private sector loans fell 2%. Euro dollar remains resilient. Sterling, as I said, 2008 highs. I was bullish since the 12th of August when I visited the UK, and I think we'll continue to head higher. Commodity markets, interesting piece on Bloomberg about raw material resurgence following record exit from funds, saying about $5.9 billion has been added to raw materials investment this year, compared with a record $50 billion withdrawal in 2013. Bloomberg Commodity Index has risen 7.1% in the first half, outperformed the All-Country World Index, which is up 4.9%, with dividends reinvested, dollar down 1.6%, and the Treasury Bond Index up 3.3%. Lots of different price behaviors, of course. Coffee and nickel up 37%, cotton and copper down 13 and 4.6% among the worst performers. I put up a 1-year chart of gold, which traded its highest level since March 24 yesterday, last at 1327.09. Crude oil last at 105.66. I still think, although it seems to have come off a little bit, that it contains a lot of spike risk if anything breaks in Iraq. I like this photograph of Maya lemon, which comprises frozen lemon custard served inside hollowed out citrus fruit. The Dubai stock index fell yesterday another 4.38%. Its monthly loss was 22%, the most since November 2008. It's been a real dramatic drawdown. Entered a bear market 8 times since 2008. Price to earnings ratio now 13.4. You've had similar price action in other indices. Qatar, for example, is down 16% in June. Put up a photograph of the Burj Khalifa and another one of Dubai that I took from the sky. Coming back to Africa now, Sudan is marking 25 years since President Omar al-Bashir came to power in a military-backed takeover. Then the FT is reporting that BNP fined Cheers Sudan human rights campaigners. On the day the ICC issued a warrant for Sudan President Omar al-Bashir's arrest for genocide in 2009, human rights lawyer Ali Agab fled the country. Today, as BNP Paribas pays a record $8.9 billion penalty for conducting business with Sudan and other countries subject to sanctions, he is celebrating. So it was all to do with, predominantly seems to do with BNP assisting Sudan escape that sanction regime. Bashir is one of Africa's longest ruling leaders. Of course, last year's forces shot dead more than 200 people on the streets of Khartoum. But he's seemingly averted economic catastrophe. You've got inflation rates above 40%. China's to reopen its embassy in Somalia, closed since 1991. Eritrea, a nation of 6 million, is the least connected country on earth, according to data compiled by ITU. It's on Africa's east coast, bordered by Sudan, Djibouti, and Ethiopia. In fact, the ambassador here is a good friend of mine. Only 1% of Eritrea's population have a landline, according to ITU data, and only 5.6% have a mobile phone. That's the lowest share in the world. In North Korea, 4.7% of people have a landline, 9.7% have a cell phone. That's interesting. Fewer than 1% of Eritreans go online. The South African all-share is up 10.137%, not far off an all-time high. It's up 10.137% in this year. Dollar versus Rand, 10.62.64. I don't see it going towards 11. I see it trending back towards 10.30. Egyptian pound, pretty steady around these levels. Egyptian stock market up 20.3479% in 2014. Up 1.13% yesterday. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was talking to the Ethiopian Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn in Malabo, and he's been on a very intense diplomatic outreach since being elected under this sort of counter-terrorism theme. 2 Egyptian police officers were killed on Monday while trying to defuse a makeshift bomb planted near Cairo's presidential palace. Sisi said, "I pledge before God, before their families, and before their pure souls, a just and swift retribution by the state." Earlier, he lashed out at what he called black terrorism, still attempting to cripple the will of Egyptians and their hopes and aspirations, a cowardly terrorism that has no religion or nation. The Nigerian all-share has been on a strengthening trend. It's up 2.789% this year now. This is fresh 12-month and probably much more highs. Interesting piece in Bloomberg about how one Nigerian's changing diet unveils a 170 million strong market. Rachel Amos remembers growing up in Lagos on a diet of mashed, unripe bananas and a homemade pudding of maize, sugar and water. In her eyes, buying food in grocery stores was only something rich people did. Amos, now a 24-year-old tailor, has moved into the ranks of supermarket patrons. She has turned away from buying from street vendors, choosing instead to shop for items like Nestle's cereal and Unilever's close-up toothpaste at a Spa International outlet near the shantytown she lives in. "Supermarkets are better," she said, as her 2-year-old daughter Joy wheeled a shopping cart through Spa's aisles. "They sell original things. It's neater. There are no flies." Talk about the valuation of things like Nestle in Nigeria. Very interesting piece, actually. Well worth looking at. and really what's underpinning the strength behind the Nigerian asset markets. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 10.629% in 2014, but of course you know you've lost most of those earnings. Well, you've lost all of them and some because of the currency. UAE-based Rotana Hotel Management is focusing on expanding its portfolio in Africa. Mostly we're looking at Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Tanzania. Coming to Kenya, Kenya's economy grew 4.1% in the first quarter versus 5.2% in the same quarter in 2013. I then tweeted Eric, said what was the number on a sequential basis, and that turns out to be 0.7% in Q1 versus 0.9% in Q4. You can see the economy is decelerating. We are going to miss the growth target of 5.8% by a mile, essentially. And that's what I was saying at that presentation I made for Deloitte. And this was entirely predictable and predicted. In a note to the CMA Britam, an insurance firm Monday said it wanted to buy out Equity Bank's 24.76% stake in housing finance. Equity Bank, of course, closed at a record yesterday and is up 49.593% this year. Housing finance shares up 35.71% this year, but trading up another 10% today. Equity Bank is also trading higher, and Britam trading up at 21. But through this morning up 31.353%. If you go to Rich Wrap-Ups, you'll see links for each individual company to which I'm referring. We finally uploaded the Kenya Airways Investor Relations briefing that we filmed. That's on YouTube and on Rich Wrap-Ups. If you care to have a look at that, please do. And I've also already uploaded an interview I did with Alex Bugwa, the Chief Financial Officer. Titus's interview will be uploaded and on the front page imminently. Returning to that Sunbird 1 oil, it is pretty historic because it's the first ever oil discovery offshore in Kenya. So I think just to reiterate that, and I did say severally that I thought the eastern seaboard of Africa from Mozambique through Somalia is the last great energy prize in the 21st century. I stand by that. Interesting piece coming off Newsday. Al-Faisal, this is a sort of radical sheikh, told BBC Panorama about Luthwaite that he arranged a marriage to Kenyan because he knew her taste. Luthwaite is charged with plotting a bombing campaign across Kenya in Christmas 2011, was so close to her new family that she fled to their house the night Kenyan police broke up her terror cell. Her husband was a Kenyan named Fahmi Jamal Salim, with whom she is thought to have the two youngest of her 4 children. Salim's sister is Nasim, divorced Mr. Dire a year before his death. Luthwaite met her future husband in South Africa in 2008, where they were introduced to each other by Abdullah Al-Faisal, a radical Muslim hate preacher who had previously been in prison for 4 years at Long Lartin Prison, Worcestershire. Luthwaite had previously visited him while he was still in jail, despite the authorities apparently being aware of their respective backgrounds. Mr. Al-Faisal told BBC about Luthwaite due to air on Wednesday that he arranged her marriage to the Kenyan because he knew her taste. She wanted a young man of a different race, preferably the black race, was very handsome and very strong in the Muslim faith, Mr. Al-Faisal told the BBC. The couple are believed to have lived in South Africa at last until early 2008. Luthwaite and Salim travelled to Kenya on fake South African passports during 2011. Kenya's NIS named both of them as members of a terror cell that planned to bomb the parliament in Nairobi, the UN headquarters, and an Ethiopian restaurant popular with Somali politicians. Luthwaite and Salim escaped as police closed in on them on December 19, 2011, after Grant is believed to have sent them both a text message saying the lions are inside. I speculated during the time of Westgate, after reading a retweet by Georgina Goodwin of an Al-Shabaab tweet, Westgate 14-hour standoff relayed in 1,400 rounds of bullets and 140 characters of vengeance and still ongoing Good Morning Kenya. Another tweet read, here are 2 of the Mujahideen inside Westgate Mall, unruffled and strolling around the mall in such sang-froid manner. And I kept thinking to myself, sang-froid is such an unusual word. It means coolness of mind, calmness, composure, kind of cold-bloodedness under pressure. And I said, then I'm putting Samantha Luthwaite on the scene. There's a trailer of this BBC Panorama program that I've been referring to on Vimeo that I found. Well, actually, I tweeted this story, and then someone responded to me and said it's not BBC Panorama, it's me. And they put up a little sort of 1.5 minute trailer. The Kenya shilling 87.50. Nairobi all share plus 10.04, 2% turned high yesterday. NSE 20 negative 0.8323% this year, but it's up 121 points since the 17th of June and rallied 1.055% yesterday. Yesterday, KCB and equity banks had fresh lifetime closing highs, confirming the more than 3-year bull market is very much intact, I wrote, and then the news about housing finance confirms that even further. Sasini was very heavily traded. Yesterday, more than 2% of its shares changing hands, and interestingly, there are probably only 5 holders of that sort of quantity of shares. Safaricom trading higher today. Citigroup upgraded their price target from Kenya Airways to 15.50. KCB closed 2% higher at a record firm 0.673% as well. Once again, thank you for stopping by.